How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back, offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world. And we'd like to tell you about them. NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
Hey there. This is Jeff Fritz, the Purple Blazer guy from Microsoft, letting you in on a little secret about my friend Carl Franklin. You know, the guy who started .NET Rocks, the first podcast about .NET. In 2002, the guy who's been teaching Blazor on YouTube since 2020. Yeah, that Carl Franklin. Well, Carl's joined up with the folks from Code in a Castle to teach a week-long hands-on Blazor class at, are you ready? Get this, at a castle/villa in Tuscany. It's sort of a luxury vacation with Blazor learning built in. Carl's calling it the Blazor Master Class. You'll learn Blazor from the ground up, finishing the week with the ability to build and deploy Blazor applications. Since the training happens for only 4 hours in the morning over 6 days, you can bring your significant other, your partner with you, and you should, right? This part of Italy is absolutely beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and Larry and Marco from Code in a Castle are organizing daily activities both at the castle and in the area. The castle is in the Maremma, a less touristed region of Tuscany, offering both classic Tuscan hill country as well as easy access to the Etruscan Riviera with sublime local food, wine, and olive oil around every corner. Breakfast is included every day. There will be 2 communal dinners at the castle bookending the experience, and most other meals and all activities are included. And did I mention you'll learn Blazor in person from Carl Franklin? Listen, space is limited and for very good reason. This is quality training in a beautiful setting. Go to codeinacastle.com/Blazor2023. That's BLAZOR 2023 to take advantage of this amazing opportunity to join Carl in Tuscany for an unforgettable week of La Dolce Vita while advancing your programming skills in this important new technology.
Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And what can I say, man? It's beginning to rain here, and the ash from Ontario is moving out now.
That's good. Weather changes. You know, the first set of forest fires that really hit hard, we had some in the northeast of BC, and then Nova Scotia caught fire, which is weird. Nova Scotia normally does not burn.
Right, I know.
And it had a heck of a time trying to contain it. And it wasn't until Mother Nature came along and said, how about some rain? That actually got things under control. But they lost some homes. Lots of people evacuated.
It's not good.
It's been serious. I mean, the saving grace for a place like Quebec is most of the fires are in the north, which is pretty deserted. Not entirely.
Yeah.
There are some First Nation villages that they weren't able to save. They evacuated the people. But you're talking about places that people have lived at literally for thousands of years.
Thousands of years, yeah.
Yeah, and so that is pretty painful.
Well, if you're confused, we're actually recording this on June 9th, and it's just a couple days after the fires in Quebec started. But just good news that it's all over now.
Yeah.
Well, mostly for me anyway.
It's disturbing to me that forest fire season has started this early.
Yeah.
But, I think it's going to be a tough summer.
Yeah. Well, let's get started with a little thing we call Better Know Framework. Roll the crazy music.
Awesome. All right, man, what do you got?
All right, far be it from me to report any news story that prevents people from doing sane things like wearing seatbelts or, getting vaccinated or using a password manager.
Password managers are good.
Password managers are good. However, every once in a while, one of them gets hacked, and this happened on June 5th. It was reported KeePass, K-E-E Pass, version 2.54 fixes a bug that leaked clear text master password.
Ouch.
That's not good.
Here's the question. Like, why did they even have it? Like, there's no reason.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Like this, the bigger thing here is that it suddenly breaks into this whole question of what were you people doing under the hood?
Well, here's the thing. It wasn't like it was just boom, done. It was a vulnerability where you had to do a memory dump of the application. So you have to crash the application,
right?
Look through the memory dump. And then even though it's a secure text box, right?
Yeah.
When the user types in the password, there are leftover strings. So basically it gets everything but the beginning string. You know, with that little dot that pops up when you're typing your password, right? So those are leftover strings, and the dumper allows users to recover almost all of the mastered password characters apart from the first one or two. Yeah, so it's not so bad.
All right. So when you understand that, you're like, oh, so I need direct access to your machine to put code in it to be able to break that. Okay.
Yeah, it's not so much of a we used it as clickbait on security this week.
Okay. Well, and the other thing is like KeePass is the, Linuxy kind of, from the open source community. That's the one that is supposed to be the greatest in a lot of respects, but tricky to use. So,
and it still is very safe. So don't,
Yeah, let's face it. And the only thing worse than using a password manager is not using a password manager.
Not using one. Correct. Yeah. Yes.
I moved from LastPass to Bitwarden.
Same here.
And I'm happy with.
Haven't looked back since.
Happy with Bitwarden. Does a good job.
Right. All right. Well, that's what I got. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Got a comments offer show 1255. So I've gone back in the archives. That's about 7 years ago.
Jeez.
And that was a show that we did with Joe Godano when we were talking about Azure App Insights. And that's in 2016. And I realized reading this, it's like, hey, those are pretty early days for Azure. And one of the conversations that we had at the time was the fact that there were updates that were coming periodically that were fairly disruptive to developers. Like the work that you were doing and implementations you'd done, they'd then be shifted around. And so CConnect actually had this comment related to another comment, a comment from Jan Terlemagne from show 1239, which is only a few shows before, about cloud service updates making life difficult for developers. He'd just seen a Pluralsight course from John Seville. I remember John on SQL Azure, and he mentioned some of the deprecated features. This is probably much rarer, but potentially a much worse problem than updates. It seems to me that the classic challenge here is managing benefits to companies based on features. But otherwise, you guys keep up the good work. We really like everything here and at Run As Radio. Thank you. And we'll keep working on the problem. And I've forgotten that like 7 years ago, we were dealing with a lot of breaking changes. Azure was relatively young and they were learning more as the number of customers grew about how things should be architected. And it was an ongoing topic for us 500 episodes ago because we don't talk about that anymore.
No, we don't. It's true.
Right? Really, it's not a thing. I think we're kind of hitting a maturity point where we can kind of count on the product to give us pretty clear paths forwards. It still happens once in a while. But they also give you lots of warning to migrate and give you good migration paths.
Yeah.
So CConnect, thank you so much for your comment. And a copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. Publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By. And
you can follow us on Twitter if you want to. We've been there a long time, but the real fun stuff's happening on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot, Rudy toot. Rich, Rudy Tooty, fresh and fruity. All
Right.
something like that. All right, let me bring on our guest today. Savannah Ostrowski is a senior product manager at Microsoft, focused on Azure Cloud Native developer tools and experience. She's the product lead for the open source Azure Developer CLI, formerly known as AZD. AZD. Previously, she was the proud manager for the Pylance language server, which powers the editing experience in Visual Studio Code, Code Spaces, Visual Studio, and more. She's passionate about Python, open source software, DevOps, and developer experience. Welcome to the show, Savannah.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Richard and Carl. Nice to meet both of you as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Excited to have you on. And
the CLI is something that I used to use, PowerShell, and then it's like built right into the portal now. You can just like click and it's been there for a while. I realize that. You just click a button and poof, CLI. I love that.
Yeah, there's like a couple different CLIs happening on Azure these days, like the Azure CLI, you said PowerShell, Cloud Shell stuff, and now the Azure Developer CLI. So,
all right,
that's
we
awesome.
better define the differences here because that's a lot of CLIs.
That's a lot of CLIs. I think so. Yeah, I think with the Azure Developer CLI being a new product, I think that is sort of a thing that we have to clarify a little bit. So the Azure Developer CLI, the thing that I work on is a higher level application developer friendly CLI. So instead of you interacting with atomic Azure resources, like a particular service, and passing in a bunch of parameters and flags and configurations in an imperative way in the terminal, the Azure Developer CLI thinks more about like the total application scope. So like all of the Azure resources and how they kind of fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the command line, we have our commands are more like initialize, provision, deploy, up, down. And we defer kind of that complexity to infrastructure as code, more declarative model. So
Nice.
That's kind of like the difference, I guess. Two tools in the same tool belt, different jobs to be done, right?
Right.
So is that sort of in the Pulumi space or the other I'm saying this wrong, Terraform, yeah.
Yeah, so we support the Azure Developer CLI uses the infrastructure as code in the form of these application templates, and today we support Bicep, which is the Microsoft flavor
Bicep,
of infrastructure, right? And Terraform. Our most upvoted issue on our GitHub repo is also to support Pulumi. The people want it.
That's great.
That's the first one I really heard about, but they've all been around for a while. All right, so when you have these high-level commands, obviously there's a lot of stuff behind them. So how you're assuming that you're connecting to your resource group or something like that first, that is your overarching context for this CLI? How does that work?
So it's actually like a level of like a higher level than that. So like the whole like the original reason the Azure Developer CLI was created was really to like support application developers who don't necessarily have expertise on Azure get their apps on Azure. And so a lot of those folks don't necessarily know what resources they need for their application. They might be able to identify like their local app stack and the technologies they're using to build their prototype, but they don't necessarily know I want Azure Container Apps or Azure App Service with Key Vault and all of that good stuff. And so the idea with AZD is that you go and you find an application template, which you can find on GitHub. We have Microsoft authored ones that our team and other teams at Microsoft have authored. There are also community created templates. Find one that maps to your local app stack, and then you basically swap out the proof of concept source code that's in there and piggyback off of the infrastructure as code assets on day zero. So you don't have to fuss with kind of the complexity of Azure. I mean, step one is really get your app in the cloud, right? And then as time goes on and as you have, problems you want to sort out, like maybe now your application serves 1 million users, you might want to change some of the configurations and the SKUs and that kind of stuff to support a more highly trafficked app or website. And you can do that but incrementally by kind of fine-tuning the infrastructure as code with a specific problem in mind instead of having to deal with all of the complexity of Azure right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, me as a developer that is familiar with provisioning Azure resources, it sounds a little scary to me because if I just say something like deploy, Is it going to create resources that I'm now paying for that I don't know what I'm paying for? Is it going to generate those things for me? Or is it assumed that those things exist before I get to deploy?
So all of those resources are defined in the infrastructure as code. And so there's nothing like magical happening here. We're just kind of like, instead of that imperative, like I'm touching an individual Azure resource or walking through the Azure portal, we have this infrastructure as code that lives in the same application scope as the developer source code. Okay. So you can go in there, understand what's happening, but the gestures that you need to use day to day are just like a lot easier to remember.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, it feels like this is a place to hide complexity so you can just go when you're ready to go and all of that. You only need to work all this stuff out once.
Yeah, I think I kind of talk about it in terms of deferring the complexity,
right.
You know, because it's there, like the complexity of the cloud is still there and there's like learning to be done, right? But it's not like you're overwhelmed right from the get-go and like you can focus on the problems you want to focus on when you want to focus on them, right?
I mean, we know we should be storing our secrets in Key Vault. The question is, do you have to have all that set up first before you can do a deploy, or is there workarounds here that then later I can put Key Vault in?
Yeah, so in like the infrastructure as code, the Key Vault would be defined there along with like monitoring infrastructure, kind of all the stuff that you would need. And then today, it's a pretty manual process to go in and tweak the IAC, the infrastructure as code, to add a Key Vault or add a database later. But we are working on features maybe in the next like 6 months to a year from now that would allow someone to inject infrastructure as code into their project.
One very important question. It's not a YAML file, is it?
So we have an Azure.YAML, which is yet another YAML file, right? We have like a very simple, short YAML file we use to tell the developer CLI, like it'll be like, what services do you have? Your front end, back end. It has the language, the target host. So if you're using app service, and a path to where the source code lives. And that's like basically all that really needs to live in there.
But the ISA configuration isn't YAML, right?
No, it's Bicep or Terraform.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
And eventually Pulumi.
And someday Pulumi, probably. So
I'm literally grabbing links as fast as I can go because, you know, I found the Azure YAML for AZD. Like all of these are the little tidbits of like, okay, I get this. I need that piece and this piece.
Yeah.
Like it's still assembling the bits to make AZD behave for us.
Yeah. Yeah, the Azure YAML I kind of consider to be like the entry point for you telling AZD like what it is you're trying to do and like where your code lives and like how it can stitch together the app. And then the infra directory contains all of your you know, the Azure specific infrastructure as code stuff. And we pull stuff from there and stitch it all together for you.
Yeah, it's still a bunch of bits. There's no two ways about it. I did find the GitHub repository for awesome AZD and there's a ton of stuff here. Holy macaronis.
Yeah.
I like the whole awesome idea. There's a whole bunch of awesome collections.
Yeah, I have to give a shout out to one of the cloud developer advocates I work with, Nitya, who came up with the idea for calling it Awesome AZD and built the initial prototype of that website, which like is really like a curated template gallery for various application stacks, Azure technologies, trying to make it more discoverable for folks to find the right recipe, right?
Well, and not roll your own, right? Like, look, here's a solution for implementing for Kubernetes, right? For Azure Front Door. It's like, it's been solved. It almost reminds me of the PowerShell world where it's like, listen, somebody's already written a chunk of PowerShell to do this. Just go get it from the gallery. Like, don't write your own.
Yeah.
To learn from it, adapt it. Like, and this feels very much the same sort of thing of a lot of folks have put a lot of energy into putting all of these templates together for you in advance so that you can pick them up and assemble them into something that's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, it's also been pretty cool, like in the the current state of the world with all the AI stuff coming out. There's like AI templates in there too. So like things like build your own Chat GPT plugin and host it on Azure, or build your own Chat GPT like trained on your enterprise data so that you can have people use natural language to ask questions about their healthcare plan. You know, so it's pretty cool to see like the diversity of applications being built in there too.
Yeah, look at them all.
Yeah, this is not just the plumbing for deploying an app service.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different pieces here and a lot of different directions you go in. So, I mean, often when we say go in AZT, that's a lot of go.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we need to know? I know about the Azure YAML schema, and I'm glad to know that. It's as much YAML as I'm going to need.
Only enough. Yeah.
But it sounds like Bicep's the first class citizen. Like that's probably my next step is to go spend some time with Bicep.
Yeah, Bicep is sort of the what we've seen a lot of folks adopting. Right now Bicep is kind of it's in our support for Bicep is in like a stable, quote unquote stable state. Terraform is a bit earlier on. It's in alpha right now behind a feature flag because we wanted to we recently introduced these alpha, beta, and stable kind of feature stages for each feature as we roll them out to communicate to folks like maybe you don't want to use this in a production scenario today because like the actual user experience of using this feature might change because we're like getting feedback, right? So we're hoping to get Terraform also to that stable state kind of with more use and more stress testing across applications and stuff.
Funny, that ties right back to CConnect's comment about changes in Azure and having services move from under view. Maybe the other thing that's happened in 7 years is that Microsoft themselves has gotten very disciplined about, hey, when we say stable, we mean stable. And if you implement this, you can expect it to keep working pretty painlessly. But when we say beta or experimental, you should expect this to shift from under you. And so you at least got fair warning that you might be surprised when the newer version comes along.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to avoid situations where people have unpleasant surprises and their stuff is broken, especially because you can run AZD and CI pipelines as well. Making sure there's a good contract there and that people can rely on it for business critical scenarios without, unpleasant stuff.
Well, it's you say the main thing, which is the surprise break, right? Like that's the one where I just pushed code. I just accepted a pull request and now I have a string of errors and everybody's like, what just happened? And it's got nothing to do with my PR. It's got everything to do with some service change somewhere in the pipeline and we're exploding now. And now you have to dismantle all that and check bit by bit to figure out what's the broken bit.
Yeah. And that itself is sort of antithetical to AZD's value prop, right? We want to keep people focused on the business critical scenarios that they're trying to go after. And so if we're causing breaking changes for folks that is derailing them from their path from A to B, then that's bad, right? So
yeah. He's like, hey, I had work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. And it also speaks to, it's up to us to be smart about reading these things and knowing, I only want the stable stuff put in. Maybe it's a fewer features than I really, really wanted, but I'm going to be surprised far less often if I stick with the stable set. And then only experimental when I absolutely have to because I need that feature desperately. Yeah,
we have a couple of things in alpha state right now. Terraform, our support for Azure Spring Apps, and also we recently added resource group scope to deployments. Previously, we only supported subscription scope, but we wanted to also give people some more flexibility in their infrastructure as code. So yeah, that's a cool idea. Resource scoping, just because Azure environments are getting massive. So me being able to say, hey, I'm going to create a resource group for all of these things, and that's where you play. Yeah, and we allow you now to with that feature, bring an existing resource group to AZD, right? Right. Previously, we only supported the case where we were creating resource groups for the user and then putting all their resources in there. But we wanted to enable scenarios where people might want to adopt AZD beyond just true day zero scenarios. So right. Yeah. Yeah, therein lies the problem with these kinds of tools. Taking an existing app and getting it to work through this is not a trivial problem. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm scanning the documentation here, and there's some information about customizing workflows using command and event hooks, and that really piqued my interest because the more we can hook into these things, the more we can take advantage of them, I think. How does that work? Yeah, so we have support for pre and post command and kind of service lifecycle hooks. Mm-hmm. So things you want to run a script before your provision or after provision or before deploy or after deploy. We give you kind of that flexibility. I think the reality was when you're building a tool for all developers, you kind of have to make it sort of malleable, right? Because everyone's got their own workflow or scripts they want to run ahead of a deployment. So we tried to kind of give that flexibility through the hook support. Yeah, very cool. Nice. Another thing I see is make your project AZD compatible. So a project isn't compatible with AZD right out of the box? What does that mean?
So today there is some overhead in kind of rolling your own AZD compatible project. So there's kind of two paths. One is finding a template and building off of someone's existing work and infrastructure as code, swapping out that source code for your own, modifying it, and then AZD upping it, which will package, provision, and deploy the app on Azure. Then there's like the option of, I actually don't want to start from a template. I want to start from my own. I know how to write infrastructure as code. I need to write infrastructure as code. I need to make add an Azure YAML to the project and then AZD up it. So there is some work there. We are working on some features that would allow a developer to not have to do either of those things, where we would maybe infer kind of what the local app stack is and then generate some infrastructure as code for them. We've started some early prototyping on that. But yeah, that's definitely still one of the things that I'd like to get us past, because that's it's sometimes not trivial, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've often run into this issue where it's like, I want you to parse my existing application and make a template for me, essentially, like work with what I've got.
Yeah.
But that's not a simple problem. People do crazy things. Who knows what the infrastructure looks like? But
yeah,
I guess today, right now, the challenge with an existing brownfield app is to go thumb through the templates and say, like, what do I need?
Yeah, what's closest?
How am I going to fit these things together?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And then figure out the rough spots.
Yeah, and there are like some templates that are more targeted at the enterprise scenarios. Like there's a reliable .NET web app one, which I think is like a true 12-factor app.
Wow.
Then we have like some JavaScript ones. There was one like that shows like a full real estate website with like a payment system and a blog and like a listing.
Wow.
Yeah, that came out at Build a couple weeks ago. And definitely seeing some people like really building large proof of like kind of sample architectures, and also some like pretty basic stuff too. So kind of across the board. But yeah, you're right. Like I think especially if you've got like a large enterprise brownfield application, like it's still a task, right?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I appreciate someone going to the trouble to build that sort of comprehensive wide app model as a template. Not that I'll probably use it directly, but it's a great starting point for me to look at it and go, now, how would I build this for my app with each of these pieces, sort of knowing how to break them down into the significant segments and what each of them would look like. But yeah, this is great when you're starting something new. To just go, hey, we've got a whiteboard scenario here. We kind of know what we want to go. I think this template's closest. Let's go. And you AZD from the very beginning.
Yeah.
But retrofitting AZD into an existing project, just going to be more challenging.
Yeah, and it like not between now and the end of this year, but probably early next year. We'll be focusing kind of more on that, like what I kind of call composability, right? Or like maybe I start out with a basic app, but then later I decide I need to add more components to it, or swap out my database, or like how do we enable people to do that? Because that's common, right? Like when you later decide or discover that there's some problem that you need to add infrastructure, like that is something that comes up pretty often. But yeah, starting with the kind of onboarding scenarios first, and then kind of the project grow up stories as well.
Absolutely. And Savannah, I'm going to interrupt for one moment. This is a very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Yo.
Talking to our friend Savannah from Microsoft a bit about AZD, which is the Azure Developer CLI, not the PowerShell CLI, not the Azure CLI. They're different. But very much focused on the dev challenge. And we right before the break, we were talking a bit about like, I'm changing the infrastructure for my app. Like, what's this going to look like? I can imagine. In fact, I've been talking to a company that's dealing with this where they're happily using Azure SQL. Now there's parts of the app that are widely distributed, more performance sensitive, and like, hey, we're talking about using Cosmos for part of this. So I would imagine you'd bring in the Cosmos template just to make it part of the deploy. And you've really got you're not going to hang up Azure SQL. That's not going away. But we're moving pieces of the workload over to Cosmos DB and having those deploys run as well, and then making some connectors and things to synchronize data eventually. But I need that performance on the front end, so I've got this platform that'll do it for me, but I got to add it into the equation. Am I thinking the right way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a scenario we like eventually we do want to support. Like I think the the tricky part is there, like, what is the developer experience of like adding or modifying your infrastructure as code or like actually updating it, right? Because like the thing is, like, a lot of application developers don't necessarily care about infrastructure as code if they're uninitiated, right?
Yeah.
They care about the flexibility in deployments. They care about, you know, being able to like fine tune stuff. But the infrastructure as code piece, especially if they don't understand the value prop of infrastructure as code, is really just like a means to an end for them.
Totally.
So like we're trying to like figure out the right gestures to expose that in, right?
It's part of my fast deploy process, right? It's that I don't want to think about deployment. So I have all of the, I learned enough IAC at the time to get the pipeline working, and then it all fell out of my head because now I've got to work on my code. And so each time I go back to make changes to that for whatever reason, it's like starting over.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think most of us do this often enough to actually retain it. It's like regex in a way. Like, you can't hold that stuff in your head.
I've never learned regex. It's just something I go into a validator every single time.
Totally, right? Absolutely. And I feel the same way about, you know, I know there's folks out there that work on this stuff all the time because they are the specialist for their organization and they're taking care of a dozen projects. But that's not me. Right. I've got my projects and I'm partly responsible for some of the IAC stuff. I'm also talking to maybe some sysadmins in it. And so I'm kind of picking it up from scratch every time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, everything you can do to make that easier for me to sort of guide me down the path, that's pretty compelling. Certainly for the initial builds, but this, you know, it's adding weight to changing infrastructure. Oh, if we're going to change the infrastructure, that also means we have to change the pipeline. Like, what does that look like? What do we got to do?
Yeah. And kind of like another feature that we're working on in the next like couple months is this like what we are calling like an application scaffolding wizard. So that would be like, I know actually things about Azure. I know what services I want. Can AZD allow me to walk through a wizard and say, I want Key Vault, I want container apps, I want this thing, and just spit out infrastructure as code modules with smart defaults that I can go in and tweak. So that's kind of like related to this effort that my team has been working on for our templates that we've authored, which is like actually coming up with a set of Bicep modules that use those smart defaults or like are like we think are a good starting point. And we'll be working to get those into the Bicep registry so that folks can have a good foundation to build on. But like, to your point, a lot of the time it's like, if you don't write at IAC all the time, you're back in Microsoft Docs trying to load Bicep or look at Terraform, right? And then you need to figure out what are the supported keys and all the values and configurations for each particular service. And like I mean, some people are experts in it, but it's definitely something that folks have to continue to revisit the API.
Oh no, I've added comments to my own IAC that says, "Hey dummy, this is like the 5th time you've been here. You're going to make these mistakes. Do this and this."
But you know what? You have a mandate to keep it high level because otherwise you're creeping towards just being another portal, right? With all the wizards and go to fill out this form first, and then this form, and then that form. And there's nothing wrong with the portal.
Yeah.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. And there are some efforts like kind of a sister team to my team is this new Azure App Spaces portal that came out at Build, which is a more developer friendly portal blade. And like, so like there's nothing wrong with portal or CLI. I think when we talk about why would someone come and use one or the other, it's more just like some people just have a preference for it, right?
Yeah, your style. Yeah.
Or sometimes there's things there's certain tasks that are just not well suited to CLI, like monitoring dashboards. Like I'm not going to go and like ship anything that uses a lot of imagery is like best suited to a portal for sure too. So,
but you know what else too? The CLI generally doesn't change too much, whereas the portal, you know, you could learn how to do a task 1 month and come back the next month and everything's been redefined and redone and everything else. So, yeah, I run into that problem because I document a lot of this stuff for a YouTube show. And, you know, I get people saying, hey, you know, the portal in your video doesn't look like the portal now. Where is this? Where is that? Yeah.
Things get moved around. That's sort of reality. But I'm feeling really prescient for my comment at the beginning of the show about change, right? It's like there is still pieces that are changing. It's not like they're taking anything away. It's just like, I don't know where to look now. And in some way, the CLI solves that problem because there's nothing to look at. It's a script. Yeah. It's just when the script breaks, now what? You know, how do you debug it? How do you trace it down? this is where I think these things get challenging, because it's still very much the same old, how far did it get? You know, how am I spitting up messages to show where it failed? Like those kinds of things. We're still doing pretty rudimentary debugging when it comes to Bicep and, I guess, you know, AZT executing on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an area that still needs some polish. It's something that we want to like work on in the next couple months as well, is trying to like, when we like the errors that sometimes you see coming from Azure are not very descriptive or actionable, right? And then you're like, you know, off Googling. And so like, how can we help folks course correct and like get back on track? Or like, are there docs that we should be suggesting people to, so they don't have to go and do the Google searching or whatever? So, or Bing searching, if that's your flavor of search. But like, you know, I think that is a good point, and definitely something that we have work to do on.
Yeah, and it's not just you. Like, that's a huge array of stuff. Like,
yeah.
The problem is that once you know what the problem is, the message makes total sense.
Yeah.
But often it is not, other than saying, we are broken, it doesn't say anything to you at the beginning when you don't know what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't get a chance to really look at Azure App Spaces during builds, just because there was a lot going on. But it is interesting to think in terms of more and more, we're going to have our own corner of Azure for doing development that then ties into the larger Azure for deployment. I just wonder what impact that's going to have for AZD. Like, does that make AZD's life easier to just deploy into an app space rather than the overall, you know, infrastructure?
I mean, I think that the thing that like I'm most interested in, right, is like, if we're using AZD as this like quote unquote more developer friendly way of approaching Azure, I'd love for that same paradigm to carry into the portal when a developer inevitably ends up there, right? Because even if we keep them in the CLI while they're doing their development, they're going to end up looking at the portal at some point.
Right.
And so like one of the things that like I'm focused on is like, can we make the paradigm feel natural and good regardless of where you end up? And then also like we have integrations and editors. If we have a VS Code extension, we have an experience in Visual Studio. Like, how can we tie that thread across all of those different clients?
Yeah. It's appealing to different audiences too, because certainly we get email from folks. It's like, I live in Studio and that's all I live in, and I don't care about the rest of this stuff. Like, give me the button to click on.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a docked dialogue on the right side that tells me what happened.
Yep.
And I am content.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, my upside to AZD is you don't have to be a .NET developer to be using this. Like, this is any kind of developer that's going to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We currently support .NET or C#, F#, whatever. And then also Python, JavaScript or TypeScript, and Java. So if you go to that template website, you'll see templates across combinations of all of those.
Those are just the languages. Then you got support for app services, container apps, static web apps, function apps, Kubernetes services. And there must be more than that by now.
And also Azure Spring Apps for Java devs as well.
Right.
So like we target all kind of the major compute targets for Azure.
Nice.
And that means all different development tools in front of all of that. Like, this is part of the challenge for you, is that you now have a pivot point between how I construct software and then at the point at which I want to deploy it, can step into AZD and deploy into Azure with that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like the beauty and also the complexity of working on a tool for all developers, right? Is that each one of those types, like even if you just looked at Python, there are like so many different flavors of Python dev, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then if you look at all the languages and you add Kubernetes, you add containers, you add microservice architecture, there's a lot of different workflows. And so like thinking through things like, I don't want to like build a tool that just wraps all of those tools. Like, how do we play nicely in that developer's ecosystem, their tool chain, whatever they're using?
Right.
That's something that is a very fun problem to sometimes think about.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Without being prescriptive, you want to embrace what they're doing, but at the same time, you don't want to make it too complex that it forces them away.
Yeah. And also enforce like best practices type stuff. Like, meet people where they're at, but also sometimes try and nudge them towards the right thing. Like, don't hard code your seek.
Are you using AI in any of this? Looking at what th're doing and say, you maybe want to do something else here. something.
We're definitely like exploring that angle in this current state of the world, right? I think everyone's sort of considering AI. I think I'm team like put AI in things where it makes sense and like is actually doing good stuff. So like one of the things we're looking at is like, can we use AI for doing that? I infer an application's local app stack and then generate infrastructure as code. So like kind of investigating that and also investigating non-AI powered approaches to doing that as well.
Right.
And figuring out, which one is actually going to meet the most folks' needs and actually support the variety of developers that we have trying to use AZD.
Absolutely.
One thing that would be really cool is to get an estimate of the cost of things, when you're wrapping these things up and thinking about them. How much would it cost to do this, stack? That'd be really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard that asked a couple times, actually like several times since starting to work on this project. I've been working on AZD for about a year, but I think like that's a recurring theme is like people want to know how much it costs to like run one of the templates we have or, and they don't want to like, shoot themselves in the foot.
Hire a general contractor, you want an estimate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Weird.
Everyone's cloud fear is like they rack up a $400 bill and then they're like, out of luck. So trying to avoid that for sure.
I just did a show on Run As Radio called Azure Sticker Shock.
Yeah.
Talking to Aidan Finn about that. And it's, he
happened to me.
Describes exactly that scenario. Well, working in a bigger company too, where suddenly the CFO's on the phone going, what are you people doing down there?
Oh no.
This is a 5-digit number out of nowhere.
Yeah, I had that problem.
Yikes.
Yeah. Well, and just knowing that there are cost management tools that you can set baselines on what a reasonable spend is so that you get warnings.
I think you can do that in Azure anyway. Like that's a feature you can
without a doubt
have a watchdog.
And you should be doing that, but that's still post facto.
You're right. Yeah.
Right. What you're talking about, which I think is wicked cool, is just
estimate,
doing a basic enumeration based on the deploy and saying this should cost between this and this a month.
The portal already does that, like on a resource by resource basis when you're going to make a SQL server or whatever.
Yeah.
Here's the SKU and here's about how much it's going to cost a month, Yeah, I like that. But yeah, to add them all up.
Yeah, at the application level, that would be pretty. I think a lot of people would really love that. So
yeah, even if you just had to take those files and pump it into a gadget, and then it came back and gave you estimates.
Right.
Like it doesn't even have to be part of the build process so much as that it's just like, hey, I've done all this work to describe what I'm going to use, rather than retype it or anything. Can I just upload these files to me and you'll give me an estimate?
Yeah.
Because then I could add it to the pipeline. It's like in the pipeline, we do this thing and then I fire off the estimate and you'll get an email that said, here's the estimate based on the current deploy.
Hey, if I can shift gears for a second, in the bio, you say you were the product manager for the Pylance language server, which powers the editing experience for all these, Visual Studio Code, Codespaces, Visual Studio. What is that? And why haven't I heard of that?
Oh, yeah. So I used to work on Python language tooling at Microsoft. And so the Pylance language server powers editing experience for Python and...
for Python.
Yeah, in VS Code, Visual Studio, and some stuff on Azure too.
That's why I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, you're not a Python person.
I'm not a Python guy, but I hear all the cool kids today are doing Python.
And Python was my first programming language. Yeah. So I'm a big fan,
especially in scientific and academia. Like that's all they use. Yeah.
My GitHub report at the end of 2022 said I wrote more Python than anything else last year, and it shocked me.
Wow.
I didn't mean to. It was an accident, but I was doing a bunch of data handling stuff, and by golly, Python's awfully good at that. The only thing that made me sadder is that the number 2 was YAML.
Oh no!
And then C# came in third. So I did write some C# last year.
Clearly,
but I don't know
you're doing it wrong.
I don't know what happened to me.
I don't know.
Oh man, that's so funny. The piece we've just been sort of quietly walking around, which I think is a big issue, other than talking about Key Vault, is the security aspects. And I would hope in these templates, especially, like that they are saying, here's where the keys go. This should be locked up. This needs to be validated. You need certificates on both sides of this. Like overall, when I wear my tinfoil hat on the security side of stuff and run as radio, we're talking a lot about supply chain breaching. That the black hats are now targeting code deploys as a way to insert malicious code to get access to systems, and that there's a real pressure now for developers to have a more secure pipeline.
Yeah, with all the templates, especially the ones that are coming out of Microsoft, like we're trying to enforce kind of those best practices. Because I think there's like, when you do your Google searching about getting your app on a particular service, it doesn't really upfront say you should use Key Vault and not hard code your tokens and secrets, or like you should maybe consider using a VNet here, or something like that. So we like definitely like internally think about that kind of stuff and make sure that that's coming in the templates. And then when their community submitted templates to the gallery, we are running through them and testing them and reviewing the Bicep code, because we don't want to promote a scenario which we're like, you probably don't want to be doing that.
It's an insecure scenario.
Right. And so we are thinking about, like, right now that process is a bit manual for the gallery. We are thinking about also adding a command like AZD validate, which would like help us kind of build some automation, or like basically allow developers to kind of get a sense of whether or not it would be admitted to the template gallery based on some of the standards we have internally on our our pipelines when we go and make templates. But also like trying to enforce best practices, because it's not really enough that you just get your app to the cloud. It's like, we want you to be set up for success too, right?
And enough people are just struggling to make this work is like tear away anything I think is not essential to get this up in the first place.
Right.
And so security often gets ditched. But more and more we're finding out that trying to retrofit security into that is worse. And to get it into the pipeline at the beginning, this is very what they're calling shift left these days. That getting security as part of the initial implementation makes a huge difference. But although we are talking two different things here, there's security within the application itself, but also the security of the deployment pipeline, because they are now targets of exploitation. And I think AZD has a role to play in both of those. Really?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something like we want to keep like top of mind. That whole shift left thing is definitely something we talk about a lot internally, as well as like figuring out how we can, because I think that the part to think of, or to kind of put in front of an uninitiated developer, someone who's new, is like why some of this stuff exists, or like that education component. Because at the end of the day, like you said, sometimes people want to strip away everything that's not necessary, or because they don't understand the value it adds if it's not just like I did the thing, I got my app on Azure. So kind of...
Yeah, I got it running close enough, right? Like at least I'm up.
Yeah, right. And I think the thing is that is a non-trivial task sometimes, right?
Yes. And often the moment it's up there, now they're using it. So retrofitting anything gets hard.
Yeah, they're like, I'm done now. Like, it's serving my audience. But I think like trying to enforce those best practices kind of throughout the workflow, not just in like the local development scenario, but as people continue to iterate and use AZD commands and like add them to their CI pipelines and stuff, like we want to be thinking about the security dimension as well.
Yeah. Getting better at that and just helping us do the right thing, because trying to get it in afterwards is becoming more and more difficult.
Savannah, what's next for you? What's in your inbox?
What's in my inbox? We're working I'm working on a bunch of features, specs, and stuff for some of that like inference of local app stack, generate IAC. I've got a talk coming up in July for VS Live Redmond, all about Azure Developer CLI. So got to prep for some more public speaking stuff. But the summer's a little quieter than pre-build, because we GA'd AZD at build and it was in a couple different keynotes and stuff. So just kind of, we have a pretty public facing roadmap on our GitHub repo. So kind of plugging away at some of those, making sure that we can ship some new features to help folks get on Azure.
Very cool.
But that also speaks to folks that want to participate in this, that are frustrated with, like, you can write issues, you can be part of the process. Are you taking PRs from externals?
Oh yeah, 100%. So I'll disclaim that the CLI is written in Go. So if you're not a Go dev, that's cool. You can write. We would love a contribution to the CLI core, but we also have a VS Code extension, which is written in TypeScript. So if you're a TypeScript person, you can do that. Or you can write templates in whatever language you'd like and submit them to the gallery. And we would love to have new flavors of app scenario on our template gallery too. So there's and also just filing issues, questions, like helps me shape our product to make it useful for everyone too. So discussions, issues. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, I look at the current issue list and it's long, 400 something.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, that'll change by the time anybody else can go look at it. But it's a lot of these almost feel like tech support. You know, I'm having trouble installing it on this. Like, is that actually a bug or is this a procedural problem? Like, but those are all potential learnings for you. It's like, this is too hard and that doesn't work right. And maybe they do find something interesting. The bigger thing here is there's a lot of people clearly using this and pressing it in places you probably haven't thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. We're even thinking about stuff like the microservice scenarios. Like, what if you don't have all of your app code in the same repo? Or maybe you're doing Kubernetes and you have IAC in one repo, manifest in another, app code in another. But how do we stitch that together? So like there's, you know, we're still, we GA'd, but there's still a long road ahead of us to support all the different flavors of app. So if you have stuff that isn't supported by the CLI today, like wave the flag, come say hi. Like we're shaping the product.
Yeah, for sure. And look at all these different products that they're pressing on it against. AKS, Azure Functions, Ubuntu. Like, this is cool. It is a UN of issues.
Yeah.
Right? And all these different countries are coming at you saying, make it work for my thing.
Yeah. It's an exciting problem to have for sure.
Sure is. Yeah.
I think you have good problems there, Savannah. No two ways about it. It's very exciting.
For sure.
Well, Savannah Ostrowski, thanks for being here and thanks for telling us about this great product. And we can't wait to hear what's going on the next year with this thing. Can't wait.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Super fun conversation.
Yeah. All right. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a